Hi, welcome to this episode of Prophecy for the Last Hour. Liz McGee. I am going to do a teaching today. I am going to start a bit of a new series, and I'm going to try to lay out, might take me a couple of sessions. There's the male and the female concept as it relates to our understanding of God. This is something that's being majorly unpacked today, rediscovered, nothing new under the sun. It's actually very ancient, but it's a new concept to a lot of people. And I have a little bit of a fear that unless the groundwork is laid and it's laid into true Hebraic understanding, again, it can get off and get skewered and get crazy. And yeah, you end up with goddess worship or whatever. That's not what we want to have happen. We want a truth to be restored to the elect of the last days, but we want it to stay totally in its true holistic understanding, coming down purely from the Ruach. So anyways, the male and the female, a better actual words would be the masculine or the feminine aspects of God. It is in the text. It's all over the text. It's in the Hebrew. We have to understand something, especially most of us, I'm assuming, listening to this channel that are Ephraimites that are coming back to our roots. All right, we are the lost sheep of Israel. We have been really out to pasture for a long time. Even Christianity has not had enough of the deep Hebraic truths and understandings of it to give us a full understanding of these restorations that are coming. But the best way, I want to use a little object lesson, the best way I can try to explain what is from the very top in its largest essence, what is going on with this concept of a masculine and a feminine side to Elohim. And if you took a coin, it's like two sides of the same coin. One of the things you have to say, it's a quarter, right? Heads, we have a little phrase, you want heads or do you want tails? All right. The thing to understand is this is all two sides of the same entity, and the whole entity is made up of, let's just call it gold. It's silver. All right. Let's say it's silver. The metal, the essence of it, what it is actually both the same sides. It's going to be silver on this side and it's silver on this side. It's silver all the way through. That is its essence. You can't take it away. Doesn't matter. You break it in half and you still got a half of silver. But it has two sides, and biblically you would use the word it has two faces to it, in the sense there is and it can change. It has a top, it has a bottom, but if you flip it around, you've got the head is the top and the bottom. It automatically, it can be a sphere. It can be, I don't want to get too much into this. All I really want to say is the essence of this coin, even though it has two sides, is it's all metal. Elohim he's in everything. He's holistic. So even if he creates a concept for our mind called the masculine and the feminine, it's still all Elohim. Okay, it doesn't matter. Words are symbols. The best we have to explain our Elohim, who is spirit, is words. And words are symbols. And they're concepts and their ideas. And we try to find things that help us to enter into understandings or revelations of supernal worlds where we know Elohim is, and we can't get there physically yet. So it's two sides of the same coin. But this is a very important principle, but the whole thing is actually made out of one essence. One of the most, I want to relate this personal anecdote then. The very first kind of experience I ever had with a transcendent God, you could say, was when I was 5 or 6 years old. I might have told this story before, but it was my first really mystical experience. And I wasn't doing anything. I was a little kid. I was playing outside. I like to play in the woods. And I was playing with sticks or something. I don't remember. But I remember, and you would call this, I entered into, not of anything I did. This was a totally sovereign act of Elohim on me. I entered a sort of this meditative state, and I had a stick in my hand, and I broke it. And what happens in a med, it like time slowed down, and this probably all took a couple of seconds, but it was like I entered into this deepest sense of consciousness and of just like, wow, this is such a revelation. It's 6 years old. What can you say? But I took this stick and I broke it. And I had this transcendental understanding that, again, two sides of the same coin. Doesn't matter. Even if I break the stick, it's still, this half and this half are still God. They're still contained. They're still connected in a way. So in other words, even though the world can be very, and today here I relate this now, and I'm like, I'm 60, I'm a little under 60 years past this experience. And I'm realizing that what Elohim is teaching me, no matter how fragmentary the world gets, how many sticks you break or whatever, and no matter how fragmentary your life is, I'll give you the midrash, Elohim is still in it. He's still there. You cannot separate. He's never separate from you. And there's so many analogies and words that use to express the immanence, the presence of Elohim in our lives. No matter what happens, he is still with us. And this is really sometimes described as the feminine aspect of Elohim, all right? His presence, he's immanent. He is always with us, even if we don't see him or understand him, whatever. And the flip side is the masculine kind of said that he is outside of it all. See, he's a macro and he's a micro. All right. So I want to say, so what in the masculine and the feminine concept of Elohim, when the very first things, and this, all right, I want to go to say this too. Before I say this, there's two ways to look at, to mine your Bible. All right, let's just say you're mining for gold, right? There's two ways to do it. You can do it from a theological or a philosophical approach. What do the words and symbols theologically and philosophically explain? Also, you can mine it from the point of view of like kind of real things, the physics and the science, the archaeology, the people. There's things that it's describing. It's very transcendent, all right? And this is done on purpose because this is, again, two sides of the same coin. Do you want heads? Do you want to talk about the theology? Or do you want to flip it over and you want to get into the science, the actual facts, the events, what happened, whatever. All right. This is done on purpose. And what I want to do and go into saying is explaining what are the deficits of most modern Western Christians is we are subject, we didn't even know it, to a construct called Western philosophy, which is very different from Eastern philosophy. The problem with this is our Bible was written by people who worked under an Eastern philosophical mindset. All right, so I'm going to, in a minute, get into that and try to correct that. But one of the things is then we're going to understand. So we're at a real deficit when most of us, and I've said this many times, do not understand the philosophical or the theological. Philosophical, yes, is more of a secular term, but to me, it's still a good term. But I'm really talking about the theology of Elohim, of what we can know about. And so there's always a concept. You have this two sides. It's in many ways, it's known as the right pillar and the left pillar, the right side and the left side. I've been through it. There's a middle pillar. These are constructs that theologically the Hebrews through meditation, through their prophecy, people deeply meditating and getting real revelation, were able to impart this to the masses, to the people. But there are one thing that differentiates the Hebraic worldview, philosophical, theological understanding, versus others. And there's many similarities in this, especially ancient philosophies. This is what people are seeing. They're seeing all these similarities. But Israel, the Hebrews, the righteous bloodline, has always kept a concept that at the top of this thing, as in essence, no matter how you break it down, where you are, what you're talking about God or in his creation, it's still the same essence. It's still gold. He doesn't change. His essence never changes, and he is at the top. Every other worldview, other than Christianity, you have, and this is the point they'll say, you have Christianity, you have Judaism, and you do have Islam, which will retain the concept that there is one high Elohim. There's one, it says, the Shema is always saying it. Shema, Hear Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, the Lord your God, Adonai Echad, Adonai is one. This is the central starting point for anyone whenever you enter into a discussion on Torah, you go in, that's the door you go through. Adonai Echad. Adonai is a unity. So if you're breaking off a part of this thing and examining it, it's still part of the one essence of Elohim. And that's an extremely important, because idolatry or paganism, they break it down, they get farther down the ladder, so to speak, and they're elevating and worshiping parts and not the whole. This is why a lot of these truths that are coming back to us, some of these concepts from the East are coming back to us in the Western world through New Age or other things. And again, they're leaving out that essentially important detail. Oh my gosh, what an important little detail. The devil loves to leave out the details. That the goal, that the essence that is made up of is Yahweh Eloheinu. All right. Adonai Elohim, the Lord God. All right. And the Jews, the Hebrews have always retained that concept. So that's why, all right. So I wanted to say that I know I read a lot into, and I tell people as even my Christians, you really need to go back to the Hebraic writings, which is more than your 66 canon. Been through this, but there is blindness still in the house of Judah. We know this. There's still blindness in the house of Ephraim. All right. But what you have to do is understand, even though there is some blindness, some fragmentation, holistically, you should, by the Ruach HaKodesh, you be able to transcend that and still mine the nuggets that are there. So I know that, the Jews, you might say, don't recognize Yeshua. Well, the Jews would say to us that we don't recognize Torah. And they're two sides of the same coin. Torah is Yeshua. He is the Lord. Yeshua is Torah. So again, as we're coming back together to all Israel, we all have to go back to the truth, that the sense that having one part of El is not going to work. He is a whole. So let me put that concept aside. Now I want to go into kind of breaking down the concept of Eastern and Western philosophy, because I suppose you didn't tune in thinking you were going to get a philosophy lesson, but more and more as I study, I'm realizing this is really one of the root problems we have, because as I see truths coming back, and again, if you try to force a round peg in a square hole, it's not going to work. So we have to get this, and I've spent years trying to get the Hebraic, the Eastern mindset. There's just a couple of keys that you need to do this. But the biggest difference, all right, first of all, in time, let's say that most of the Western philosophical understandings that we have today, that we are groomed in and schooled in, and even subconsciously now, comes from the Greeks around 6th century BC, all right? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, these great Greek mind thinkers, all right? And they're synonymous around the same time period, Alexander the Great. This is a time, there was a huge, when Alexander conquered the known world, he did something. Historians will tell you this. He really flipped the coin around. He changed things in their in a very fundamental framework, which was a philosophical way of how you look at the world. Before that, the whole ancient East had a more Eastern philosophical outlook. And I'll give you some of the main differences, but so you have this Western mindset that is coming through from Socrates, or they're here. But before that, you had in the East, and I want to tell you what the East is. Geographically, you have a concept of the Far East, China and Japan. You have the Middle East, which is India, Babylon, Assyria. You have the Near East, because we hear these words, and it's helpful to kind of be able to know where if you're in the Mideast, where you are. If you're in the Near East, you're in Egypt and Israel. These are geographic kind of, but at the same time, these are all called the Eastern peoples. And that's why we find in these cultures this type of philosophical approach that we realize is very different, all right, from our Western mindset. But basically so Israel is right here. I told you the Near East. Israel stems from ancient. It's older than Western philosophy, first of all. And it stems from Israel being Near East, from an ancient philosophical, which now, and I will say this, Enoch, the patriarch, who we're discovering today, this is why he is such a pivotal figure. His writings today, and a lot of the writings that are called Enochian, that are coming out of this worldview, this is the more ancient, all right? This was the foundational, more ancient understanding that was in the known world. Then you moved into a time period where Israel became a nation. 6 BC. So, wouldn't you think the enemy would have a counter strategy? Oh, surprise. All right. Trying to change things up for us. He's always trying to, anyways, the Eastern philosophies has a concept. Everything is holistic. Remember when I told you, when I broke that stick, because I had this incredible transcendent understanding. You can't break God apart. He is holistic. He is contained in everything. He is a whole. Nothing separates him, even though the final entity might look totally different, or an orange and a bush are totally different. Well, let me put it this way: an animal and a vegetable, totally different kingdoms, animal kingdom, plant kingdom, everything. It is still part of the whole creation of Elohim, and he does indwell his presence. Now, the thing that we have to understand why this relates to biblical theology, okay? In this, they're very concrete. And this is why anybody who has studied Paleo-Hebrew, when you look at what the meanings of the words, and they're so concrete. An ox head. Oh, I wish I had a list here. Teeth, a house, very concrete things. The meanings right next to are not at all abstract concepts. You would think they would be very lofty, but they're very concrete, because the concept is that everything in the physical world that we see comes from a root, comes from somewhere. It comes from an invisible realm into manifestation. And you can take the physical manifestation, what we can know, a tree, a mountain, a person, a sky, a sun, a moon. Think of the very concrete concepts in our Bible. And from that, and from studying its properties, is from where you that's where you you mine its abstract essences or concepts that it's teaching you about higher things you can't see. So in other words, you always start in the physical. You always start with the object, and you always study the object, and then you go into its characteristics, and then that will tell you the deeper meanings behind these words. All right? This is a fundamental thing. So that's why you have a tree of life and a tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree is telling you something. You study the tree, its branches, its leaves, because later on, what I'm going to go into with the male and female, especially, we have to understand the tree of life. What is in this concept, these symbols? But so it's, in other words, that the world below is a reflection of the world above. And we know that Elohim, ultimately in his essence, the highest ways we can understand him is in his infinite understanding. So the flip side is Western philosophy started breaking away from the natural, and they became focused only on, quote unquote, this world of the mind. So in other words, and it became ideas for ideas' sake. They didn't have to be rooted in anything that we could understand. It's why the Greeks, and then they just became these incredible philosophers that could bump their gums forever on abstract concepts that whatever, there's no end to it. All right. This is why I think Paul makes this statement. They became totally divorced from reality. They were not rooted. Their concepts and their ideas became unrooted, untethered from the concrete natural world. All right. So language became much more philosophical, and these words, it became a battle of the words, battle of the minds, and it was not rooted. So in other words, I believe Yahweh instituted this concept of concrete. From that, it is a mirror of the invisible. This is why Paul says that everyone will be without excuse to have figured out that there's a God, that there is a watchmaker at the top of this thing, because of the creation, because it speaks about everything you look at. If you studied and meditate and think of it, will tell you there is an intelligence behind it. All right. So this is really pivotal to understand. Let me give you a couple examples of this and how this would play out in language. Okay, and when I get into the set for the deeper parts of this, but in Hebrew, so sentences, so in the male and in the male and female too, you have the concept, you have gender from the get-go in the Hebrew language. Now look at, I've read it with the rabbis technically, or the sages technically, I believe it. Why would I doubt it? That Hebrew is a language of angels. They were his craftsmen many times. There is an element of transcendentness in Hebrew, in the letters, in the roots. Some of its properties are totally unique to any language on the planet. There are so many interesting things about Hebrew that you can mine, so to speak, out of it that really do put it a cut above other languages. And it is very focused on nouns and verbs. It doesn't, in the Western mindset, you would have they're more focused on adjectives, descriptives, but it's a much simpler. That's why if you look at Paleo Hebrew, it's a very simple, some of these concepts, and they do tell a great story actually. But they're very finite, very concrete examples. So let me give you it. So, okay, let's just take an example of north, south, east, and west, right? I mean, those are abstract concepts in and of themselves. If you're in a bubble, so to speak, if you're in a balloon, you got north, south, east, and west. How are you going to orientate yourself? I mean, which one? You don't even know if you're up or you're down, or either. Okay, it's very relative. It's abstract. All right. And then you would come back from that, and let me give you from the Hebrew point of view how they delineate direction. And it has to do, so they're south because Israel is in a geographic location, the center of the world to them, right? They're the apple of God's eye, whatever, of Elohim's eye. South comes from the root Hebrew word. It means Negev. You ever heard of the Negev? The desert. It means the desert region. So for them, south is the desert region. That's what's south of them, all right? And it means the desert, and we get the word Negev, and we know that there's a huge desert south of Israel called the Negev, all right? The north is known as the unknown region. Now, I want to tell you something else geographically in the Hebrew mind. The way they use these, when you move into so I guess what I want to say too, when you have a concrete word, like desert, like south region, Negev, it is from understanding that it is a desert. Then you think about the properties of a desert. What is a desert like? All right, it's dry, it's a wasteland, there's not a lot of life, it doesn't get a lot of rain, it's not productive. All right, all those truths we can know are allegorically explaining to you something about the South. So when prophetically you use the word from the South, you are including in it all of these concepts. It's a wilderness. Nothing really great grows there. All right. So this is how they derive their allegories. And this is what I guess I want to say at the beginning. You have to understand, the allegories, the parabolic language, the way everything used is derived specifically from the characteristics, from the essences of what it's describing. So now, the north is described as the unknown region, all right? And at this time, let's just say, well, all right, let me say this. Another thing you understand about the Hebrew language, it's always multidimensional. So in other words, yes, we are on a physical earth plane, but it's always known. They have always known that Elohim is in the highest heavens. So he is not geographically down here on earth. So built into these words into direction is ways to specify also other places in the cosmos. All right. So the north is a region unknown. Yes, you could say maybe it was way upper north, areas that they had probably not populated or explored or settled, remote parts of China, Russia, up northern Europe and all that. Okay, possibly. But the flip side is that the meaning of the unknown region means it is in, and it is, because I'll tell you this, because Gabora, which is one of the symbols on the tree of life, is geographically represents the north, which is in one of the higher dimensions. All right, so you have to understand, this is these are concepts that can be layered and applied to what also they know about the cosmos. So let's get through this. So the west is the Mediterranean Sea. They're Israel. They're on the water. They're right there on the shore in the Mediterranean Sea. So going west is the Mediterranean Sea. And that becomes, you go through there, and this is where a lot of stuff, you go through the gate at Spain, and what do they call that? The gate of, there's a name for it. That's an important quote unquote concept, the gate, as you get out of the Mediterranean Sea into the big ocean. Okay. And that, all that geography, you can sail the known sea, then it was also known as the sea of the Mediterranean in the west. But once you got through that portal, that gate between Africa and Spain, you're in a whole different, almost realm. So these impact in these words is geography that has great allegorical depths. The last one is the east, which means the region of the rising of the sun. And east again means beginning. East, that's why it says it's Eastern philosophy. It's more ancient. We know the sun rises in the beginning of time, or in other words, the sun would rise in the beginning of time. So the east would always refer to prior knowledge, prior understanding, prior people groups, whatever. And the west sort of is, because the sun sets in the west. So the west is sort of always denoting, sometimes the end of something, a progression. You migrate to the west and there. So built into the, it's very concrete. We're not just taking a word north, south, east, and west and, making it up, so to speak. It's rooted out of, okay, here, I'll give you another example of this. It's rooted in the Hebrew word is rooted in a concrete fashion. The word for west is the word yom. This is off the top of my head. I hope I'm correct about this. Because, and I think yom, Y-O-M, is the day. And the point is the sun rises in the east. It does its whole progression. When it sets in the west, that's the end. That has made a complete cycle of a day. So it's a wonderful, beautiful language, but it's so much easier this way. You don't really get lost. If you stick with the concrete and you move out from there, taking its principles, its allegory, what it'll teach you, you will always be tethered. Okay, there's a string, there's a connection, there's a root. You can go up and down on that root. This is a fabulously important concept in Hebrew theology. All right, and it's always progressive and linear, and it doesn't jump around. This is why it says the crooked man who is not straight in his ways, all right, in your mind. These are very linear, progressive. It's precept upon precept, one concept builds upon another. Now, let me give you another one. In Hebrew sentences, the verbs identify the action of an object, while nouns identify an object of action. I told you it's much more simple. You got things and you got what things do. And the verb melech Okay, so the verb is melech, is the reign, and so the verb and the noun together in the sentence, the reign of the melech, or the reign of the king. Okay, while the noun melech is, you could turn it around and you say the king who reigns. The point is two sides of the same coin. The reign of the king who reigns. That's why it says the kingdom of Elohim is within us. This is, again, we can extrapolate from this. All right, we have a king. His kingdom is out of this world, we're told. Where is it? Well, he tells us it's in us. Well, what's in us? All right. See, it's a progression, but you don't get lost in it as you do it. So a mountain is not a static object, but pictorially, and again, Hebrew was originally a glyph, a pictorial, a symbol of something concrete that had tons of information in it. So the head, to them, a mountain is a head lifting up out of a hill. In other words, you have something of the earth that is coming up and hugely going up, and it becomes this majestic. It's sort of like a tree, it just comes up out of the earth, and it has a head, it has a top, but it's majestic and magnificent, and you can't miss it. So it's all about what it is pictorially telling you. When he says, another example of these point in, when we do get into some things that are a little more for us nuanced, like what are they really talking about? It says, like he says in the commandment in Exodus 23, have no other gods before me. Now, first of all, we've never really understood what God says. Like, what does that mean? Small g. I thought there was only one God. Now you're talking about little God. I mean, it gets the Western mind, especially the Western, they get really tripped up on this stuff. But in Hebrew, the thought of this passage is saying, it says not to bring another one of power in front of my face. Now, this is where we get into, and we can get into the tree of life and some of these concepts, because if you understand where the face of Elohim is, what it's talking about, and a thing not to bring another one of power, if you understand Hebraic, that you have this complete mind picture, you get it. Oh, I get it. But we'll get there. All right. So one of the things that's really important to understand too is, like Israel, I would say, I mean, all right, let me say this. One little rabbit trail, but it does pertain. The sages have this concept, and actually Paul carries it forward into the New Testament when he says, we all know in part and prophesy in part. Remember what I said, you have a coin. It's all made up of gold, the whole thing. This one has two sides. Okay, we're called masculine and feminine, right? This is the kind that there are many parts, all right, and you can examine them. You stick with the literal or the concrete, and you move out, and you retain it the whole way. There is a concept, okay, so Talmudically, all right, I know a lot of people don't like today, Talmudic, and I'm like, you don't understand. If you're going to throw the Talmud out, your study of Hebraic understanding, you just cut off half your leg, all right, you don't understand. The rabbis had, it says they put a fence around Torah. We don't understand. We're still in two houses here, right? There's still the house of Ephraim and there's still the house of Judah. We're not a total united all Israel yet. Judah had every right. This is their birthright to retain because they have theirs is the covenant, the promises, the testaments, it was the temple at that time. They have everything, quote unquote. Their job is to keep everything in the house. They have the writings, okay? I'm not reading to you from some Ho Chi Hindu book or something, all right? I'm telling you what is in your writings of Hebraic understanding, okay? They put a fence around Torah in the sense that the Talmud is because they needed to retain that knowledge. They needed to lock it down. As they are going into exile, this is completely a concrete concept. They're going to exile. They're going to be separated. There's not going to be any central place like the temple with all its inner chambers in which to keep all the texts and the writings together. For the priests are going to be all over the place. How are you going to do that? You have to put a fence around Torah, which is a concept. You have to kind of lock down what you know so far, all right? And they had every right to do that. And the rabbis, one of the arguments against them is that they disagree. Well, don't we disagree today? But because different parts. And so there's two things that are going on within this. It's not that they're disagreeing. They understand they all have a portion. It's called having a Torah portion. A lot of times they are giving you a portion, an allegorical construct that you can derive from the concrete understanding or the gematria or whatever in the translation, in the actual Hebrew, how it's put together, but it's not the whole. It's a Torah portion, and they're fine with that. That's why they do that, all right? And a great sage mind, you should be able to glean from all the Torah portions. Paul says, I know in part and prophesy in part. I'm just giving you a part of something. And believe me, 10 years from now, I hope I have a much deeper understanding of all of this, all right? We're to grow in our Torah portions, and we're to put our Torah portions into a holistic whole. So, while, yes, they don't see Yeshua, because basically he was for us, the Ephraimites, the lost sheep. Okay, oh well, but are you going to throw out all the wisdom and everything else that Judah has? I mean, that's pretty crazy. Anyways, my one. There were two great mystics of the, or I wouldn't call it sages of the Middle Ages, Rambam with an M and Ramban. And what those, I won't go into, but those are, it's an acronym. You take their whole name and they string them together and they get their little code name, so to speak. Ramban with an N and Rambam. And they were contemporaries, and they kind of had these two sides of the same coin, understanding. Rambam was a staunch rationalist. He just wanted to stick with the concrete. All right. He didn't want to really extrapolate all of the quote unquote and mystical. When I talk about mystical, and this is why we have to really get a handle on this word. It's part of the tradition. It's real. We have every right to extrapolate mystical truths or from of truths about the supernal worlds that we can't really see from the concrete concepts of these things. But and it's a pendulum swing, and sometimes you go too far one way. Sometimes we are way too far to the left side today into total rationalism, and we have totally in a rational sense, if you can't taste it, touch it, it doesn't exist. We have totally cut ourselves from the supernal concepts, the kingdom of Elohim, which is within the soul, the spirit, the inner workings, the innards, it's called, the hidden parts of our whole existence. So we need a real move back to the center, or even a little swinging the other way into the mystical understanding, so that we can begin to get a little balance. All right. And the whole point of this thing, let me say that and you know what, this is in Chinese philosophy, what the yin and the yang. I think the yin is the female, I think. Yes. And the yang is the masculine. They get this, Enoch was a colossal thinker of his time. Enoch, son of Jared through the righteous bloodline, all right, Adam, Seth, and on up, all right. He influenced all of the righteous. He influenced hugely all of the philosophical, because he's and through Noah, who was kept all that information through Shem as they repopulated after the flood. This is why there are so many fundamental similarities. There's a lot more to that. But anyways, Rambam was a staunch rationalist, but Ramban was a mystic, and he wanted to retain the understandings of the supernal worlds that are given to us through this. And they kind of wrote, from their POVs. All right. But I think today, the whole point of today, because we are coming to a wrap up at the end, we're all about holistically putting this thing back together. We're going to a place where there will be no separation of male or female. We will be back to being one essence. We will all be back together. Now, so I have to, before I get into the concept of the male and the female, what he was doing, I have to lay out this whole philosophical concept, because to me, it's the safest way to stay in the zone. So you have this concept of in the yin of the yang, in the masculine or the feminine, in the this is the first, the most fundamental, the most I just can't say fundamental principle is the masculine and the feminine, and it's in the language. So there's a thing that says Yah spoke. All right, the first thing we get in the Genesis text in the first verse, the first action, all right, the first action. So always remember, it's always noun and verb, action and object. Sound is a vibration of air, while vibrations in the energetic field are primal and affect everything, because as the physics and metaphysics agree, absolutely everything, including mankind, is vibrating energy. See, we're coming into this understanding that it is all the essence of Elohim is an energy. It's the creative force of Elohim that he, and this, so I don't want to get too deep on this, but there's a thing that says Yah spoke, all right, let there be light, all right, and they're saying, if you study out Genesis chapter 1, the rabbis, the sages will tell you there's 10 sayings. Yah spoke 10 times. 10 is a very pivotal number. 10 is the number on the tree of life of the Hebraic Sephiroth, of the emanations, and this is why I have to start to unpack this concept, the diffusion, all right, the fluxes, the flows, the energies, where it went, how it went from the original speaking. Now let me say, and I can't get too deep into this because this is in the Hebrew words. That's why a lot of times the mouth and the tongue and the teeth, we find allegorically words used because, all right, so let me try to explain this. We know that God is spirit. We know Elohim is spirit, all right? So this is why you have to have this understanding. You have to keep it in a theological construct and not concrete too much, all right? Let me put it this way. I'm concrete. Elohim is not concrete. I'm not going to really see him walking around. Now, Yeshua is a different issue. I mean, right? But I'm not going to see him start walking around as a human being, all right? We know that that's not possible. He could not contain all he is in a physical container. He sent his son, all right? And that in and of itself is a huge theological construct from something concrete into abstract. But what I want to say is this energy, and that there's 10 sayings, 10 times Elohim said, let there be, he spoke. But when you speak, there's three, it's not just speak, there is a concept that your lips, your tongue, and the breath are all working together and to form, to push out, to create, because words create a force. I mean, so in other words, they're taking very concrete things that happen when we speak, and they are able to extrapolate concepts, and that's where you get wind, air, breath of Elohim, and lips, he spoke shape and form, because it is all part of. So I guess what I'm trying to say, do you understand? We have a physical apparatus that allows us to, with breath, okay, and Elohim was able to actually create whole worlds. And this is what they tell you, that how powerful the tongue is. Like life and death are in the power of the tongue. Where would they get that concept? Because I know that I can't literally say you're dead and somebody's dead. I mean, it's not but it's a concept of the creative forces that are involved in putting forth speech. And it's not just, it's a combination of three. It's breath, it's air going through, it's the formation, the lips are forming, and my tongue, it's all working together. It's a fascinating, I mean, you can get really deep on all this, but I just want to touch on these things, all right? And I should start to wrap up, because if I'm going to lay out my foundational frameworks here, all right? So let me see if I got this. All right, so if we're going to go into this concept of the tree of life, which, again, you always have two sides of this coin. Now, let me go back to this. Masculine and feminine. In the beginning, let's just start with Genesis, the very first verse out of the Bible. It says, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. This quarter is an object lesson for that whole thing. Now you could and you'd have to take the word beginning out, and there's so much information in that word. Bereshit. Bereshit is in that word. Bereshit is the word covenant. He made heaven and earth. He made a covenant with heaven and earth. In other words, you could just close the book with beginning, because this is what it says, and I want to get the philosophy what the difference between saying in the beginning and with beginning. There's a huge theological construct. You can say both, but for my purposes, I want to say with beginning. Elohim created, which is the word bara. You have to know what the implication of each of these words is: heaven and earth. You could close the book and walk away. A child you can tell that, your father made the whole heaven and earth. Isn't that wonderful? You have such a good father. He made this whole world for you. That's enough for a child. Seriously, you could close the book and walk away, and you can be happy your whole life knowing that the Father, and he's got you in this little bubble, and he's watching over you. You know where you can go, and hell or heaven, or away from his presence. I mean, you can actually sum up the whole thing. But let's have the PhD level understanding. As I say, it's there for the taking. Let's get it. The two sides of the same coin. The feminine represents the physical. This is all right. One level, it always represents the physical manifestation of Elohim. He spoke, and a process started, and boom, we end up with something. All right. This is, and what he ends up with is always referred to as, that's the earth part. But see, what we kind of understand, we think earth just means, the dirt out there. And this is why we should read our great Hebraic philosophers like Philo of the first century, and these people who were way deep thinkers. And there's no earth. We're not just talking about the dirt. We're talking about, the first, second, third heavens. We're talking about everything in physicality that is working and making and sustaining and is part of our physicality. This is earth. All right. The flip side is heaven is masculine. Heaven is all the realms, that the ethereal realms that are full of air that we can see up to them. We can see up until the sun, the moon, and the stars, to that dimension. We can't see beyond it. All right. But we can know a lot through this, taking concrete things and extrapolating out correctly. We can know a lot about these supernal worlds. So heaven. So with beginning, Elohim created the heaven and the earth, the masculine and the feminine. That's really what it's telling you. All right. Which is a whole, that is that, and I've been through this in some of my videos, it's just that I'm really getting a deeper understanding of this thing. It is a binary system. That's all it is. So in other words, if you want to bring back the feminine, fine. And if you're not comfortable with, because you don't need to concrete it down to like there's a bunch of women, that God is half woman and half man as we perceive it down here. This is our problem. If you will get your best, in really most glorifying understanding of Elohim if you keep this in its original archetypes, because one of the main thing is that the original concept is giving you the supernal archetype, which is the pattern from which all copies are made. So when you have, at one point, Elohim created them, male and female, in his image. That's the first copy that he ever made of himself. It says, and it's a plural. Oh, let us. So that's telling you something. Make man, this Adamic man, in our image, male and female. All right. In that is loaded the sun. And that image is the first, actually, that's the sun in the God. That's Yavhe, Vavhe. That is the sun. That is the first image, the first copy, the first pattern of Elohim that's coming forth. So these things, it's really important to understand the archetype, and the purest understanding is in the archetype. Now, if you want to stick with the science and the physics of this is absolutely, we know this is the foundation of everything that is created. It's a binary system, and you have an X and an O. You have you can have a negative and a positive. It doesn't, if you're magnetic, you've got a negative and a positive. You've got a passive and an active. If you're talking on molecular biological wherever you go with this thing, you're going to have two, if you're in computer modulation, or is that the right word, a computer graphic, the computer world, X's and O's, ones and twos, strictly a binary system. If you are in the tree of life, if you are in a Hebraic understanding theologically, where in the Sephiroth, you are in the Keter, which is the crown. Keter is this concept of, it's the Big Bang. It's singular. It is, well, it's even beyond that. It is the first. See, it's hard. The first thought of Elohim. Here you have the transcendent is going to become immanent, and this is Keter. Whatever, it's so vast beyond finding out. But the very next two kind of flow emanations, the way it comes in, is you have this in Hebraic theology. It's in our words. It's in our Hebrew. You have Hokmah and you have Bina. You have this concept of yin, and you have a concept of yang. You have a male and a female. He takes and he immediately sets up a system of reproduction, a system of combination. All right, this is a very, and then he starts combining, and there's a concept, and I have some that simplicity breeds complexity. From this very simple concept of masculine and feminine, but in those things, let me tell you something, in Hokmah and in Bina is everything, every thought that Elohim ever has had, and that it's ever going to before the creation is there. Every archetype, everything, it needed, there's nothing left out. So this is why in these concepts, if it takes reproduction, if it takes a combination to make the next level of something, this is why we can call it positive, negative on the physics side. You can stick with just words that are very, positive, negative, light and dark, active or passive. If you want to take it as kind of, and from what we can know from our concrete images, you do have male and you have female. We know that we're two sides of the same coin. If you're going to get a third person, if you're going to get a baby, it's going to take that male and that female to generate that flesh. All right, there's no other way to do it, or there's no other way it should be done. That's the archetype that Elohim set up. But you could say you have the same thing. You have the day and you have the night, two sides of the same coin. You have the sun and you have the moon. And I'll tell you, there's so much theological there's so much allegorical understanding pulled out from the concept as we watch the phases of the moon, what it's telling you, or the sun, different things. You have winter, you have summer. It's interesting. This starts with this because, and it's true when you think about it, because I have a friend who does calendar, and she says, and it's true, Hebraically, they only talk about, you have the winter and you have the spring. You have summer. No, I didn't mean, you have summer and you have winter. First off, that's the first, okay, you have a solstice here and did I get that right? An equinox here. So it first starts out with two, a summer and a winter. You have a sky, you have the heavens, and you have the earth. You have light and you have dark, and all of these tracks. So some of these all fall under masculine qualities, some of these all fall under feminine qualities. They represent a total mutual interdependence. They're not separate, all right? That's why, again, when he said, bring no other power in front of my face, why would you bring the feminine and elevate the feminine over the male, or the male over the female? We do have, okay, so there is a complete interdependence that exists, and one exists within the other, and the world below always contains and supports the world above it. All right, so, and this is, when we get into this, and when we get into the Sephiroth, and I'll explain how it comes down, this is explaining, a lot of the unfolding of the story. until we have basically this fall that's happening down here in physicality, and Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden. But we're going back to, this is when you understand, then these words get it, the marriage supper of the Lamb. We're having this marriage of a bride with a groom. Why is this two sides of a coin? You got a bride and you got a groom, and they're going to come together, get married, and then boom, we're going to have a new heaven and a new earth, and everything's going to be great again. So so in other words, to get it correctly, and this has to do with the keys to the kingdom. It was delivered unto Adam, and it all the way through. There are keys. There are certain ways to interpret these things, and there are certain ways not to. All right. And this is how they could always tell a true prophet from a false prophet and things. If they were using the allegories correctly, if their extrapolations were following the pattern and not deviating too far to the left, too far to the right, they weren't making anything up, they weren't getting crooked, it was straight. That was indications that they are correctly handling the word of truth. We've totally lost these concepts. But so in Enoch, there is the whole, which I said, this is my contention now, is that if you understand the two houses of Israel and the reunification we're going into, the third component of that is to kind of factor in, and especially the whole world before, from Adam up to Abraham. All right. We have always had very scant information fed us about that world. All right. And they would always say, well, we don't really, well, it's not true. There's a lot of information you can know. There's a lot we're being able to flush out and put together. And that whole concept of what happened and what the world was going through during those times is extremely important and pivotal to the whole storyline. All right. So I think I'm going to wrap this up a little bit, and I'm going to come back soon, and I'm going to start to talk about the tree of life as an archetype, how it is rooted and grounded in truth, in true reality. And because this is why Solomon was called the wisest man that ever lived. All right. He was taught, Elohim gave him so many, downloaded into his brain or whatever, how you want to get the programs to extrapolate insane amount of truth from the physical world. He was that's why they say he was a Renaissance man. He's a great botanist, and he was an astronomer, and he understood all the different sciences. He understood so much, and from that he was able to gain and extrapolate and understand so much into the unseen realms. Of course, there's a flip side to the story of Solomon. There's a total imbalance, because the whole point of the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, this whole binary system, if it's not done and kept in perfect balance, that's where you start to have chaos and evil and things, getting out of Hoyle. See, in these, it's all about balance. It's all about harmony. It's all about keeping things, the scale, having even scales. Nothing is supposed to run away and be elevated at the expense of the other. So when we get into the tree of life, which I'm going to have to do, start off next time. Do I have anything really I want to say? We're going to flush, like I said, this male and this female, this masculine and feminine, because I'll tell you the last archetype for it that is really important to understand is the human brain. See, because we are all, this is the side of the coin. If you split this thing too far, in many aspects, we are both male and female. All right. So there's a sense of a sphere. This thing is a circle that goes around. You can't get too, all right, let me just say what I'm trying to say. Our brains are left brain and right brain. This is the point. Okay. I think the right brain is the male side and the left brain is the female. And one is very linear, scientific, very structured. Everything is, sets and subsets of everything categorized. The other is much more flowing and creative, and ability to absorb many concepts and work in a much more of an abstract sense. We all have parts of this, all right? And that's the whole point. There's a principle in this. of having balance of our right brain and our left brain working together in balance, so you can be a healthy individual in your mind. And if you have a healthy mind, you're going to have a healthy soul life, and you're going to have a healthy body. So on that note, I want to say shalom and peace, and let God be true, and all these crazy philosophies, let's just get out of them in Yeshua's name. Amen.